A true lesson for life. See the importance of punishment for someone to be renewed, to live in harmony with their family. This will really change the coexistence of those who do not obey their parents and relatives. Once upon a time, there was a bee that lived in a hive but did not like to work. Instead of collecting nectar and turning it into honey, she drank it all by herself. She was a real lazy bee. Every morning, as soon as the sun began to warm the air, the little bee would appear at the entrance of the hive. She checked the weather, adjusted her antennas like a fly, and happily flew from flower to flower all day long. Meanwhile, the other bees worked hard to fill the hive with honey, which is the food for the newborn bees. The bees, being very responsible, began to get irritated with their lazy sister's attitude. At the entrance of the hive, some guard bees, usually older and more experienced, took turns ensuring that no intruders entered. These guardian bees had hairless bodies, worn down by the constant friction with the door. One day, the guards stopped the lazy bee at the entrance and said, "Companion, you need to work, for all bees have their duties." The little bee replied, "I fly all day and get very tired." "It's not about getting tired," said the guards. In short, the lazy bee continued to avoid work. The guards gave her a warning. "Companion, you need to work a little too. This is the first warning we give you." So, they let her pass. However, the bee did not change her behavior. The next day, the guard bees repeated, "You need to work, sister." The little bee replied, "I will do it one of these days." "It's not about doing it one of these days," they responded, "but tomorrow, remember that." And once again, they let her pass that night. The following evening, the same situation repeated. Before the guards could say anything, the little bee exclaimed, "Yes, yes, sisters, I remember what I promised." "It's not about remembering the promise," they responded, "but about working. Today is April 19th. Therefore, bring at least one drop of honey tomorrow, April 20th. And they let her in again. However, April 20th passed without the lazy bee bringing any honey. As night fell, the weather changed, and a cold wind began to blow. The lazy bee hurriedly flew back to the hive, thinking of the warm comfort inside. But when she tried to enter, the guard bees blocked her way. "You cannot enter," they said coldly. "I want to come in," exclaimed the little bee. "This is my hive." The others responded, "This is the hive of hard-working bees. There is no entry for the lazy." "I will work tomorrow for sure," insisted the little bee. "There is no tomorrow for those who do not work," replied the bees, who were wise in philosophy. And so, they pushed her out. Not knowing what to do, the little bee flew around for a while as night fell. Tired, the bee fell to the ground and began to crawl, climbing up and down small branches and pebbles that seemed like mountains. Finally, she reached the door of the hive just as cold raindrops began to fall. "Oh my God!" exclaimed the helpless bee. "It's going to rain, and I will die of cold." She tried to enter the hive again, but once more she was blocked. "Sorry," moaned the bee. "Let me in. It's already late. Please, sisters, I'm desperate." "It's even later," she pleaded. "For pity's sake, I'm cold," she begged. "It's impossible," responded the guards. "For the last time, I will die." So they told her, No, you will not die. You will learn in a single night what it is to earn rest through work. Go away." And thus they expelled her. Shivering with cold, with her wings wet and stumbling, the little bee continued crawling until, suddenly, she fell through a hole and rolled to the bottom of a cave. This place was actually the hollow of a long transplanted tree, where a green snake with a brick-colored back was coiled, ready to strike. Snakes love to eat bees, so upon encountering her enemy, the bee murmured, closing her eyes, "Goodbye, my life. This is the last time I see the light." To her great surprise, the snake did not devour her immediately. Instead, it said, "Hey, what are you doing here? You don't seem very hard-working to be out at this hour, do you?" The little bee replied with a murmur, "I don't work, and that is my fault. The snake, mocking, added, "Well, then I'll take care of that. I'm going to eat you right now, bee." Trembling, the bee exclaimed, "It's not fair. It's not fair that you eat me just because you are stronger than me. Humans know what justice is." The snake, coiling up, mocked, "You know humans well. Do you think they, who steal your honey, are more just, you fool?" "No, it's not because they take our honey," replied the bee. "And why then?" asked the snake. "Because they are more intelligent," said the little bee. The snake laughed loudly, exclaiming, "Well, with or without justice, I'm going to eat you. Prepare yourself." "You'll only do that because you are less intelligent than I am," challenged the bee. "I, less intelligent than you, little one?" laughed the snake. "That's right," affirmed the bee. "Then let's see. Let's have 2 contests. Whoever performs the most impressive feat wins. If I win, I'll eat you." "And if you win?" asked the snake. "If I win," replied the bee, "I have the right to stay here until dawn. Do you accept?" "Of course," said the snake. The snake laughed again, certain that the bee could never surpass her challenge. Then she quickly went out and returned with a eucalyptus seed capsule. "Humans make these capsules spin like tops and call them eucalyptus tops. I'll do that now." The snake said, "Watch closely." She coiled her tail around the top like a string and uncoiled it with such speed that the top began to spin and buzz wildly. The snake laughed, knowing a bee could never do that. When the top finally stopped spinning and fell, the bee said, "That feat is very impressive, but I could never do that." "Then I'll eat you!" exclaimed the snake. "Wait a moment! I can't do that, but I can do something no one else can." "What is it?" asked the snake, surprised. "Disappear," replied the bee. "How?" exclaimed the snake. "Disappear without leaving this place, and without hiding in the ground." "Then do it, and if you fail, I'll eat you immediately," said the snake. While the top was spinning, the bee had time to examine the cave and noticed a small plant growing there, a little shrub with large leaves the size of a coin. The bee approached the plant carefully, making sure not to touch it, and said, "Now it's my turn, Mrs. Snake. Turn around and count to 3. When I say 3, look for me everywhere. I won't be here anymore." The snake, confident, began to count. 1, 2, 3, and turned around, opening her mouth in surprise. There was no one there. She looked up, down, to the sides, scoured the corners, and tried everything with her tongue. The bee had vanished. The snake was perplexed. "If your test with the top was very good, the bee's test was simply extraordinary. Where did she go? What happened to her? There was no way to find her." "Well," the snake finally exclaimed, "I give up. Where are you?" A soft voice came from the middle of the cave. "You won't harm me," said the voice. "Can I trust your oath?" "Yes," replied the snake. "I swear. Where are you?" "Here," answered the little bee, suddenly appearing from within a closed leaf of the small plant. What had happened was something very simple. The plant in question was a sensitive plant, known for closing its leaves at the slightest touch. In this region, where the vegetation is lush, the leaves of sensitive plants are larger, and therefore, at the touch of the bee, the leaves closed completely, hiding the insect. The intelligence of the snake had never perceived this phenomenon, but the bee observed it and took advantage of it to save her life. The snake was very irritated with her defeat, but kept her promise. The night was long and endless, with both of them leaning against the highest wall of the cave, while a storm raged and water poured in like a river. It was very cold and completely dark. From time to time, the snake felt the urge to pounce on the bee, and the bee believed her life hung by a thread. "Never, ever," thought the little bee, "did I imagine that a night could be so cold, so long, so horrible." She remembered her previous life, sleeping warm and comfortable in the hive. She cried silently when the day arrived and the sun appeared as the weather had calmed. The little bee flew back to the hive and cried again silently in front of the door, built with the effort of her family. The guard bees let her pass without a word, for they understood that it was no longer the lazy bee returning, but a bee who had harshly learned the lesson of life in just one night. From then on, no other bee collected as much pollen or made as much honey as she did. When autumn arrived, and with it the end of her days, she still had time to give one last lesson to the young bees around her. "It is not our intelligence, but our work that makes us strong," she said. "I used my intelligence only once, and it was to save my life. I wouldn't have needed that effort if I had worked like everyone else. I was just as tired flying around as I was working. What I lacked was the sense of duty that I acquired that night." "Work, companions," she continued, "thinking that the goal of our efforts, the happiness of everyone, is much greater than the fatigue of each one. Humans call this an ideal, and they are right. There is no other philosophy in the life of a bee." Now, what about you? Have you ever experienced something similar to this story? Or do you know someone who has? Share your thoughts about this life lesson for humans in the comments below. Sometimes in life, we need to do this to make children appreciate their parents more. If you like this reflection, give it a like and make sure you are subscribed to the channel to always receive these motivational stories firsthand. God bless, and see you in the next video.